All right, let's get started. Tonight, what we are doing, we're talking about the YIMBYs next door. We're going to hear from 3 individuals who are on the front lines about how they're leading the pro-housing, pro-regionalism movement, and how we're going to structure this evening, after I introduce them. They're each going to give a short presentation. I'll engage them in a couple questions, and we'll just open it up to the audience for some Q&A. So going in order of how they'll be presenting, Mila Zelka is the board president of Bay Area Forward, a community organization that supports resident-led groups who are working to create inclusive communities. Prior to Bay Area Forward, she co-founded Palo Alto Forward, dedicated to better housing and transportation options. She's a trained architect with a background in sustainable design, historic preservation, and social entrepreneurship. Terry Christensen works with residents of the neighborhoods around the Church of Five Wounds in central San Jose, advocating for a plan to be developed over a period of 12 years for high-density, mixed-use, transit-oriented development around the site of the proposed BART station behind the church at North 28th. Last but not least, at the end, Alex Shore is one of the founders of Catalyze SV, Catalyze Silicon Valley, and he's driven by 2 interconnected goals: to make Silicon Valley more equitable, affordable, and sustainable, and to make government as responsive, cost-efficient, and innovative as possible. He currently works as a consultant with BTA, helping lead community engagement efforts on BART Phase 2. So thank you all for being here, and we'll go ahead and kick it off.
Okay, so I'm Terry Christensen. I'm going to talk about Communiversity and the Five Ones Brookwood Terrace neighborhoods. This is a different kind of project. It's micro, it's not regional. And I should say I'm not the leader, I'm the facilitator, I'm the advisor. It's the residents of these neighborhoods who are the leaders who make the choices. Fortunately, they're choices I can support, because I don't know if I want to facilitate or advise NIMBY groups, but they turn out to be YIMBY. And to help you understand that, I have to tell you a little 17-year history of the group. Creating YIMBYism was not our goal initially. It's still not necessarily. The goal was to build social capital and to build civic engagement, as was Mila's to start with. This starts in the year 2000, when Mayor Ron Gonzalez, Cindy Chavez on the council, and others established the city's Strong Neighborhoods Initiative, SNI, using redevelopment funds. They chose 19 underserved neighborhoods, one of which was Five Wounds Brookwood Terrace. The map on the right, you can see it in relation to downtown. They chose 19 underserved neighborhoods and poured city staff and redevelopment agency funds into those neighborhoods. And the staff and the funds were to be used for goals set by the residents. So each of the communities went through a process of establishing a top 10 list of things they wanted to happen. Some of them were capital, maybe it was street lighting or sidewalks. Some of them were things the city really couldn't help much with, like one of ours was building a college-going culture. Others were things that the university could help with, including building a college-going culture, but the specific projects that I'll talk about tonight, I should say, no one mentioned it, but the name Five Wounds comes from the National Portuguese Church, the beautiful, iconic church at East Santa Clara and Highway 101. And the Five Wounds, of course, are the Five Wounds of Christ. It confuses people sometimes how we got our name. But that's the name that the residents of the area use to talk about their area. So that's where these things come from. As I said, this has been a long process, 17 years. But over this process, members of this community took possession of their own community and of planning for their own community. Once they developed a plan, took possession of that plan. Tonight, actually right now, they're at the San Jose City Planning Commission saying yes in my backyard to a 70-unit affordable housing project that includes housing for homeless people with supportive services. It took a while for everybody to get there, but they got there. So the first thing was setting out the top 10 priorities, and one of those that they focused on in the year 2000 was what happens when BART gets built to San Jose and there's a station behind the Church of Five Wounds. There's about a 20-acre area there, the old San Jose steel site. It's kind of it's truck storage now. It's a site for marble and granite. It's low-level light industry because it's not the steel industry anymore. And so there's a pretty big area available for development in the middle of this community. So 17 years ago, they said one of our top 10 should be we develop the plan for what we want to see happen on that site. We don't just leave it and wait to see what the city comes up to. So they're being proactive, which is pretty unusual for any neighborhood group to be. And mind you, there are about 22,000 residents of this area. The majority don't speak English at home. Spanish is the most common language, more Vietnamese more recently. And it's an immigrant community. It's a definitely working class community. They work hard. And getting them to meetings is extra complicated because they're working 2 jobs and they've got kids. So you got to provide childcare. You got to figure out a time when people might come to a meeting, and you got to figure out how to communicate with them. And we didn't have email when we started either. So anyway, that's one of the top 10. Another was a Rails to Trails project. There's an abandoned railroad line that runs through these communities. And they put that in the top 10 as well. It will connect, once it's completed, from Story Road and Happy Hollow at the bottom up to the BART station at North 28th Street and onto the Berryessa BART station. So it's a crucial link in the city's transportation system, and it's the linchpin for the city's trail system. Five Winds Trail will link to Three Creeks Trail to the south, the rest of the Union Pacific Railroad line. And they call it Three Creeks because Three Creeks Trail connects the Guadalupe River, Los Gatos Creek, and Coyote Creek. It runs east-west. All the trails run north-south along the waterways. But between Three Creeks and Five Winds, and I know it adds up to 8, it also adds up to an east-west connection for the city. So to me, this is one of the most exciting things that the community came up with. I've got a little bit ahead. So I come in the year 2005 as the founding executive director for Communiversity, which is a partnership of the community, the 5 Winds Brookwood Terrace neighborhoods, San Jose State University, with our students doing service learning projects that are related to the goals of the residents and help them further those goals. And the city of San Jose through the Strong Neighborhoods Initiative, so Communiversity, a combination of the name. And we immediately went to work on the top 10. That's what the residents wanted to do. We had 2 major principles with Communiversity. Number 1, we do what the residents want, not what the faculty members of the university people want. They have to fit the residents' goals. That's sometimes a challenge. And secondly, we're going to be there for a long time. It's not one semester of 15 of my students doing something. It's years. And we're still there now, 12 years later. But one of the first things we started on was helping the community plan for the BART site, the BART station. And we did 7 major workshops and many smaller ones. There were, 40 Neighborhood Action Coalition meetings over this period of time. The NAC, the Neighborhood Action Coalition, was the resident framework for the Strong Neighborhoods Initiative. And there were representatives of all of the neighborhoods, neighborhood associations, and anybody else who wanted to show up at the NACs. But then we also did 7 more consciously focused workshops on what do you want to see happen there. And these were facilitated over the years by 65 graduate students in our urban planning program. So the urban planning students were helping the residents do the planning, providing the technical support, beautiful mapping, great ideas, but they also were learning how to work with the community and how to listen, because that was our mission. There were about 60 other students, including my political science students, who helped with stuff like outreach, getting people to meetings, leafleting, getting the word out, talking to people, doing neighborhood surveys. And also one of the things we learned, we did a survey of the neighborhood early on and asked them, and it was focused on building social capital, but we asked them, why don't you go to meetings? What keeps you from going to meetings? The number 1 reason was work. Not much we could do about that. Number 2 reason was childcare. We could do something about that. childcare and kids' activities in our workshops. The third reason was not feeling welcome. Well, that's the easiest thing to resolve. You just have to be nice to people and befriend them, make them feel welcome. And our San Jose State students are pretty good at that. So they were extremely helpful. So over time, these many meetings produced this. It's actually this 210-page, detailed, beautiful community concept plan for what the residents wanted to have happen in their community. And it's high-density, mixed-use, transit-oriented development. And they came up with the idea. It wasn't imposed on them. And VTA and the city actually worked cooperatively with us as we went along. And this is the urban village. The star is where the BART station would be, just behind the Church of Five Wounds. The red line through the middle is East Santa Clara Street, and then it crosses 101 and goes on up Allen Rock to King Road. And the brown line running down the middle is the trail, the railroad line. And this is the area that the community focused on, the boundaries they selected for more intense development. It doesn't impinge on the single-family housing that surrounds it. So this is a lot of it's light industry as you go south there. A lot of it is light industry to the north, and along East Santa Clara and Allen Rock, it's businesses, but it's generally one-story buildings, not very intense. So they came up with the plan, and this is 2010, and so here we were. We had a plan, and then what do you do with the plan? How do you make it happen? Well, we were pretty lucky, but also well organized, because the city was doing its new general plan at the time, Vision 2040. And in the new general plan, there was the concept of urban villages. So our folks started going to the task force meetings, Teresa will remember, and eventually stood up and said, you want an urban village? We got one. The city planners didn't like it that much, because it was our plan, not theirs. But the task force liked it, and it fit their concept. And so the task force basically recommended the plan, which ultimately did go to the city planners, and eventually became 4 urban village plans, because the city planners had to qualify things. Our folks worked with the planners to translate the community plan to the city planners' vision and language and so on. But they also, the city asked us to wanted to split it up into 4 plans. And the reason is timing. So the city calls it horizons. Some of these areas, to the north, that's Five Wounds, that's where the BART station would be. Well, that's not going to happen until the BART station gets built. Nobody's going to go in there and develop anything for a decade at least. And to the south, that can kind of wait too until the BART station's there. But the Roosevelt Park plan to the left there, and the Little Portugal plan to the right, those areas, things can start happening, and things are happening. We've got 2 proposals, 3 proposals have gone forward, and 2 are in process, and 1's on the council agenda tonight. So the idea of 4 separate villages really reflected timing. Oops. Our folks are pretty smart, and so once we got the plan, and the city adapted it, and the city council unanimously adopted it at 12:30 a.m., when about 6 of us managed to still be there. But they unanimously adopted it. That's how it works.
Feels good when it happens.
It sure does. We celebrated. City adopted it, and some of our folks said, well, yeah, okay, now it's adopted, but, we need to keep an eye on it. So we formed a little group of about 12 people that called themselves the Watchdogs. And it's a good thing we did, and the group got really, really, really activated, because in 2014, shortly after, about a year after the plan was adopted, the VTA forgot about the Allen Rock Station. the one at the Church of Five Points. Well, they didn't exactly forget about it. They moved it to the middle of the Roosevelt Park neighborhood where there's not much land available for development and not much parking. And even VTA never gave us a really good example for why they did that. But boy, this motivated our folks. And this is where I get to the fact that the community took possession of this plan and really became passionate advocates. We called the watchdogs together when this happened, and I said, okay, so if you really don't want to bark, we don't have to do anything. We can all just go home, let it go. And they jumped all over me. No, we want this, it's our plan, we want this to happen. It's not bark so much as the urban villages that we want. We want to see these kinds of changes. So they became the BART Transit Village Advocates. We like to say it's BART at 28th Street because Alum Rock is VTA's name, and it's not on Alum Rock Avenue, and it's not in Alum Rock, and it's got nothing to do with Alum Rock. And we don't know why they call it that, but they do. So we're working on changing that. We've done a big survey monkey, and Little Portugal won overwhelmingly, partly because I think the Portuguese community got a little bit organized to vote. So anyway, that station got put back in the plan. VTA got really awakened and has been working closely with us, this guy among others, to coordinate what happens. And we formed a coalition of groups to do this advocacy. So the name changed a little bit to Urban Village Advocates because some people thought Watchdogs was too aggressive. So now we're advocates. We're much nicer. This is some of what we do. I'm not going to run through the whole list because I'm pretty sure my time is almost up. I will add to the bottom. I mean, the main thing is when plans come forward, we're organized to react to them and talk to the developer and tell them why it is or is not consistent with the plan. But I think the group is open to changing plans if good stuff comes forward that isn't necessarily consistent. And the main ways that have been talked about so far is actually we should have greater density, more housing, and maybe go higher. Go figure. How did that happen? I don't know. Because people really have thought about it. So just quickie lessons. Outreach. Just constant outreach, early outreach, and outreach often. It doesn't happen. It's like getting people to vote in an election. It doesn't happen from the first mailer that they get, right? And it's much more likely to happen with personal contact. Really good communication is important. Listening carefully, developing personal relationships. Mila mentioned the social aspects of groups. This is really important. Our folks hug when they come to meetings. They're happy to see each other. It's a reunion. That's because of this long period of time working together, but because of the development of relationships and real trust. But it also helped a lot that the group had access to deep expertise from our urban planning people and resources to help with outreach and organizing. And that's where a lot of groups just are never going to have that kind of support. And we've also had great grassroots leadership emerge from the group. Final lessons learned. First of all, you don't need to be a planner to plan. A lot of this stuff is common sense and just figuring it out. And regular people, anybody can learn the language. Well, the language is hard sometimes. Anybody can learn the ideas and express the ideas if people are willing to really listen to those ideas. Secondly, traditionally underserved and underdeveloped neighborhoods, I think, are more open to new development, and that applies here. I mean, go look at the San Jose Steel site and see if you wouldn't rather see high-density, mixed-use, transit-oriented development on it. Or go look at the abandoned railroad line and see if the trail wouldn't be a little bit nicer. So that matters, and that's the kind of neighborhood you're working with. It's not Palo Alto. The kind of neighborhood you're working with is going to matter. Thirdly, providing urban amenities is real bait for YIMBY support. You're going to get something good out of this. You're going to get public art. You're going to get a trail. You're going to get a plaza. You're going to get some kind of public facilities. And then, of course, everything isn't all rosy. There's still continuing concerns. The big arguments that come up, we've got a couple of affordable housing projects coming through the process. Big concerns of the existing residents is parking. These are overparked neighborhoods already. They're low-income neighborhoods. People are doubled up in housing. People are living in garages and basements, and so they're parking cars. So it's a genuine problem, and the transit system isn't quite there yet to solve the problem. Traffic's another concern. And finally, displacement and gentrification. And to that, we don't have very good solutions, except that, at least in this community, they've been supportive of affordable housing projects and trying to figure out how you can get current residents into those projects, or maybe employees of the businesses of Santa Clara and Allen Rock. So we had a good outcome. It took a really long time to do it, and a lot of investment of time and energy. For me, it's been very worthwhile because they're wonderful people to work with, and because I really like the ideas that they support. So it's easy to be there with them.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks again for everyone for coming tonight. It's a little hard to go after Mila and Terry, not only because they give great presentations, but they've been at this a little longer than Catalyze SV and I have.
Plus, we took all your time. Sorry.
It's okay. So it's important to acknowledge, and so for people who are wondering, we're sort of all in community together, collaborating. If you feel like there's overlap, or you're wondering why are they all in different groups and doing different things, we're all figuring out together, working in community and collaborating together. And not only is it us on this, is it a dais, mini dais, but it's also some of the people in this room, in this building, thanks to SPUR for helping spur us on. And we do have some Catalyze SV leaders. Anyone who wants to raise their hand and identify someone who's been involved with our organization so far, if you want to raise your hand. Yeah, Christian, sure. Yeah. So we do have some folks that we're building that we're excited about. Our leaders are really helping drive our work. Today I want to talk about our organization in terms of really two stories. The first story is to part of what Mila and Terry have talked about, some of the issues and challenges we have with the development process and how the community is engaged in Silicon Valley in that process. And the second story is one of the examples that really was the light bulb moment for me about this kind of work and helped me figure out that I needed to get off the sidelines and get on the field. And the kind of process we want to see as a result of the work Catalyze SV wants to do. So this is our newly minted mission statement up here. It's all about really two things, which is inserting ourselves into the development process to advocate for better development projects and to ensure that the community engagement process around development is more inclusive and collaborative than it is right now. So first of all, the problem that so many of us are experiencing is the cost of living here. Whether my wife and I are sitting around the backyard with our friends talking, if we just do that for an hour, inevitably the cost of housing will come up. I've seen some poll numbers that say the number one top concern of everyone right now in our city of San Jose is in fact housing. And if you go down the list, homelessness is right up there near the top, and so too is traffic congestion, and so too is housing for seniors. And guess what? All of those things are encapsulated in the movement that Mila, Terry, and I are a part of and trying to address. Unfortunately, in my experience, and I think a lot of the Catalyze SV leaders here, what we're seeing is that when the development process occurs, I don't want to say it's perfunctory, but as city staff, as developers do this process, it's not their oeuvre to be doing community engagement. And it is not rocket science, but it takes a lot of gumption and grit to really get down and do it. And we find that what happens usually, I was at a community meeting 3 weeks ago about a new project, a single-story smart and final in the middle of Midtown San Jose, and there were 8 people there, and they were the usual players, and a lot of the people who tend to show up don't represent a diverse swath of our entire community, and they're usually in opposition to projects. And the kinds of issues they raise are the ones you see in front of you: traffic, density, and parking. And so that being raised over and over and over again has a very strong effect because in earnest, developers and city leaders are listening to the community. And when 8 people show up and they say they're the community, well, who the hell else are you going to listen to? So it makes it very difficult when those are the 3 issues that are primarily being raised. And instead, some of the other issues that those of us in this room and those in the community and those of us waking up to are thinking about and talking about are not getting raised. The idea of planning a project around something besides the individually owned automobile. The idea of should a project have a stormwater runoff system or electric vehicle charging stations or a community garden. Those things are not coming up. Things like should it be mixed use? Can we have businesses next to housing, and what kind of benefits can that provide us if we have active neighborhoods 24 hours a day where people are feeling safe walking down the streets when it's 11 o'clock at night? And finally, is our neighborhood affordable so that if we are doing new development, to Professor Christensen's point, we're not just gentrifying it, we're allowing different types of people making different amounts of money or on fixed incomes to be able to live in a place. And so when those issues are not raised, what I see time and time again, a perfect example was a project that was actually voted on by the City Council last night that Catalyze SV had 13 of our leaders sign on a letter in favor of. This was originally a 25-story project, and when the project came back to the community for a second community meeting, it had been whittled down to 18 stories. Why? Because the city planning department said that was, quote, the community preference. Well, unlike downtown San Jose, this project was proposed in West San Jose, right at Santana Row, where there will be, albeit not the best public transit currently in the area, there will be a rapid bus going down, and it doesn't have FAA height limits like we have here in downtown. As our co-founder Kirk Barton says, what's the difference to a pedestrian on the street between 18 stories and 25 stories? You're not really truly going to notice. And yet every time a project gets whittled down like that, we lose housing units, and it makes it harder and harder for people to live in this community. And that process is occurring again and again and again. Every time you raise the issue of traffic or parking, it costs a developer anywhere from $25,000 to $60,000 to build a parking space. Well, not only does that make the project harder for a developer to do, it also makes them more likely to put a housing unit instead. And frankly, if I had to choose between more people being able to live in this community and more cars, I'm going to choose the people every single time. Well, that's the story of some of the problem with the process and the outcomes. This is the beginning, for me at least, of the story of some of the solutions. And it actually has nothing to do with me. It has to do with Catalyze SV's co-founder, Kirk Vartel. How many people know or have heard of Kirk? Great. Well, Kirk owns a extremely well-reviewed pizza shop. If you pay attention to Yelp, it's one of the best in San Jose. He's originally from New York and has a New York City pizza shop in West San Jose, just west of Stevens Creek. And he started that shop about 10 years ago. He also lives about 6 blocks away in the neighborhood. And there's a parcel of land right in his neighborhood that used to be called the Bayrack site. It was an agricultural site owned by the state, sold to the city of Santa Clara. And it was empty for many, many years. And Kirk's vision was to do something different there. And what did Kirk start to do? But through his own initiative and his own desire, he just started holding community meetings. He hired architects and said, create renderings of a concept. And he started, like this very meeting where Kirk's up there at the front, he started holding meetings. And everyone was welcome to come, and tons of people did. And Kirk built up a listserv of 1,500 people just through his own personal interactions and meetings. And he came up with this concept called the Agrihood. Because it was an old agricultural site to honor our history as the Valley of Heart's Delight, he came up with the idea, oh, and by the way, that the project required by the state had to have senior housing on it. So he said, what if seniors could live on this site and grow and harvest their own food that they could themselves use as well as potentially sell to people? And from that, he came up with the idea of an agricultural neighborhood called the Agrihood. And as he was starting to get this idea out there, he re-initiated talks with the city of Santa Clara, who initiated an RFP, and a number of developers actually responded to that RFP. Well, one of those developers here in the room tonight actually adopted many of the principles of the agri-hood in their concept that they submitted to the city of Santa Clara. And that was the first light bulb moment for me to say, oh my gosh, here's a proactive, positive vision, just like the one Professor Christensen talked about in his plan, but in this case a very micro one. Here's a positive vision of an actual project that someone wants to build, and the developer says, we will help build it. And that was very fundamental to me. Well, I showed up a few months later at a City of Santa Clara council meeting in which they were voting on the 3 developers, deciding who to give exclusive rights to build the project to. And Kirk and his community folks turned out with these big yellow agri-hood t-shirts speaking in favor of the project. And my second light bulb moment happened when I saw all this community engagement and advocacy, and lo and behold, the city of Santa Clara decided to select core companies, the developer, to build this project, which they are working diligently. It's called Santa Clara Sustainable to build right now. And for me, that was the proof of concept moment. We can do this, we can replicate this, we can build a number of people to do this over and over again. Our organization is going to be focusing on a slightly different part of town. We're going to be focusing on West San Jose, Santa Clara, and Midtown San Jose. Ground zero being Stevens Creek Boulevard and West San Carlos Street. Part of the reason is there are good folks like Conn University and Terry Christensen working in areas just east of San Jose. There are good folks like SPUR and the San Jose Downtown Association working here in downtown San Jose, but there isn't in this part of town a little bit west. And yet that part of town has a lot of development interest. Developers are just snatching up and deciding to do projects, and that's great, but in that experience is a vacuum where there aren't enough advocates and community folks advocating for projects. And since Kirk lives in that neighborhood and I live in Midtown San Jose and some of our other board members do as well, it offers us an opportunity to be authentic grassroots advocates. And this was great advice from our friends at SPUR to organize in places where we already lived and worked. And so that's part of what we're doing right now. And the agri-hood is sort of the first example, and these are sort of the principles, the lens by which we're going to judge projects. And each one of these things on any given project will sort of say, hey, does it have this component? Does it have that component? And if the housing development is already 100% affordable housing, well then we probably don't need to advocate for affordable housing on that project. But maybe it doesn't have ground floor retail, maybe it doesn't have a sustainability feature like energy efficient building materials or appliances, and maybe there are ways we can not necessarily say this is the plan and this is what has to be done, but be prescriptive and work and collaborate with developers and city leaders. Because a lot of the community meetings that we talked about earlier, not only do folks raise issues like traffic density and parking, and they often do so quite vociferously, but it is not a collaborative experience. The developer's trying to persuade, oftentimes NIMBYs, the NIMBY neighbors are trying to kill or diminish the project, and it doesn't have a feeling like everyone's coming out a winner. The developer probably goes home and has a beer, and the community probably goes home and has 2 shots, because it just doesn't feel very good for any of us. So we want to sort of work on that process. We don't want to just impact the developments, we want to impact the process. We want to come up with some secret sauce and some of the components Professor Christensen talked about, some of the components Mila talked about, which is how do you get people excited about community engagement? How do you reduce the barriers so that everyone feels like a community meeting is collaborative and fun? And so what we're going to be doing, what our Catalyze SV leaders are already doing, is identifying projects throughout the city that they say, hey, this is in our geographical area, we think we can make an impact, and let's start advocating around that project. And so if you looked at sort of what our process looks like, what we're going for, this is kind of what we're thinking. We're going to identify the projects, we're going to get in collaboration and community and conversation with the developers and the city leaders and say, hey, we think that this is what the city, the neighborhood, the larger community really needs, and let's create a great process together to get there. Because as our co-founder Kirk says, it's not a slice of pie to be divvied up. It is something that we're all sharing and working on together. So again, this is our mission statement and what we're all about, and I know I'm joined by panelists in thanking you all, and we are excited to take your questions.
Cool. Thank you guys so much. 3 people doing really, really fantastic work. So before I turn it over to you all, I wanted to pose a couple questions to the 3 of you. First off, you've all sort of touched on this in your presentations, but I'd love to expand on it. What do you think will be required to really create sort of a scaled and lasting social movement here in the Bay Area, here in the South Bay, that says yes to growth? What will it take? No, don't talk at once.
Yeah, I think 2 things. One is time and effort. You know what all 3 of our organizations are doing, investing the time and effort and drawing people in and making them feel good about participating and having people show up at council meetings, because traditionally it's the no's who show up, and just a few yeses can make a big difference. The other thing I keep thinking about in San Jose is, what if we really had a viable urban village right now that we could take people to and say, look, this could be your street. It would be really nice. Part of the challenge is we don't. I mean, Santana Row, kind of, but over the top. Lincoln, Japantown, yeah, kind of, but on such a low-level scale. So it will be really exciting when we finally have high-density mixed-use transit-oriented development that has a plaza and has a trail and has stuff people like and can be an example.
I think social media is a huge benefit for us. My experience is that if you, especially in the wake of for many of us, somewhat distasteful 2016 election, if you can create trust with, as an individual or an organization, and you say, hey, here's on my Facebook page or my Twitter, come to this meeting or advocate for this or sign on to that, I think that has real resonance. And that's all part of the larger picture that Mila and Terry are talking about, which is just plain old grassroots organizing. We just need to, what I keep saying to our Catalyze SV leaders is we need to find our people, identify them, and get them out. So if we got 13 people out to a letter last night, that was a fantastic first step for us, and the project actually got approved. So we not only need to organize, but then we need to declare some victories too. And getting an 18-story project built with a rooftop park that's open to the entire public, and a restaurant, and it's mixed use with commercial on the ground floor. It's not a perfect project, but it's enough for us to say we're moving in the right direction and we're beating back some of these NIMBYs. So as long as we can just continue to use the effort that Terry talks about to find our people and get them out, to simple actions, like he said, just a few yeses can make a huge difference in the political world.
One more thing, we could do a way better job of letting people understand how local government works and how they can make a difference in it, and that is where they can make a difference. I'm talking to some groups, Indivisible, some of the Indivisible and Swing Left organizations, and they're kind of focused on congressional races, and that's really important. But we can make things happen here locally. Things have happened here locally. The Children's Health Initiative made Santa Clara County the first county to insure every kid. You can actually get something done. So I wish we did a better job of educating young people. That's what I did for 42 years, but about local government and local politics and how you can be engaged and you can actually get things done. It's hard.
You both mentioned the term getting a few people out there to say yes on things. I think what we found is far too often planning commissioners, city council members listen to that vocal minority that shows up, the people that are saying no. Oftentimes, that's all it takes to sink a project. The downside is that there are plenty of people that want to say yes, they just can't make it out. Terry, you alluded to this. So the people that show up, they get the weight. How do we encourage these electeds and these appointed officials? How do we encourage them to listen outside of their chambers and take in the voices that maybe can't be there in person but want to have a say?
We'll start with Alex on this one.
And our co-founder just walked in, Kirk Farton in the back for Catalyze SV. poor Kirk and I were at a city council meeting for 4 hours last night, just waiting to speak on a project. So that's a larger, somewhat, I don't want to say tangential, but we need processes that allow anyone, if they don't speak English, if they can't get to a city council meeting, if they're relying on transit to get there, we need ways to get people to be engaged outside of that process. And some of that comes through just relationship building on the front end with elected officials, planning commissioners, etc. I was having a conversation, getting some advice from someone. They said, you should just bring people out to sites and say, hey, look how beautiful this could be if you build it this way and do this. And so getting those people early and trying to engage them outside of the dais and the council meeting, I think is really important. And one tactic we tried this week was saying, well, if our folks can't turn out, let's put as many names as possible on a letter and turn it in, or get as many people as possible to write a letter and send it out there. So I think that's really going to be part of the process. And I think the human inclination when you're fighting a project is to say no, but I think most people want to say yes to a future. And all those council members know that they can't not, that development's happening and they have to control it and they have to allow it. So I think we're just making it easier for them to vote yes, and I think they want to anyway.
Two things come immediately to mind. One is social media. When the BART station got dropped from our 5-room site, working with the East San Jose folks and various other groups downtown, we started doing emails to elected officials till some of them started calling us up and saying, call off your dogs. You're clogging our systems. So those things work. Secondly, getting the elected officials out into the community. We do candidate forums with the university, so they're coming and talking about our local issues, and getting them to meetings of the group, not just you going to their meeting, because their meetings are horrible. They're long, and yeah.
I mean, sorry, just one last point. I mean, there are folks, I think in Philadelphia, who have started a 501c4, an actual PAC, that works to elect candidates who are sharing these kind of values. So that's another way the movement could move.
So you guys have all done fantastic work in building a coalition, a willing coalition to sort of progress these ideas forward. Where have you found resistance? And is there anything separate from resistance? Is there just anything that surprised you as you started to build these coalitions?
I think the thing that Catalyze SV is going to grapple with, and I think it's going to be a really healthy tension, is we have our allies in the labor movement who are advocating for some projects as well, because that keeps people working. The question is, do those projects have labor agreements or community benefit agreements? And we're in community with everyone. Obviously, developers are often opposed to more requirements on them, whatever they're like. And oftentimes, labor unions want community benefits agreements or set policies on prevailing wages. So we had a really good first initial healthy conversation about that at our last board meeting. That's some of our board members helped lead. So I think that's going to be a challenge for us to figure out. Professor Christensen talked about it when he talked about gentrification. And that's where the affordable component becomes so difficult. I remember a vote, I'm on the San Jose Housing and Community Development Commission, and they were saying, well, when we tear down a building that used to be affordable housing, do you have to replace it with 100% affordable housing, or do you have to replace it with an equal number of units of housing as the old development? And that was really tearing at my heartstrings, because I wanted more housing development, but I was worried that if you put a more onerous requirement, that the developer would walk away from the project altogether. And that's the ideological push and pull that I think we're going to feel. But I also welcome people pushing us in those directions both ways. In case these are my last moments, I would just say anyone who wants to work with Catalyze FC, we are still recruiting board members, supporters, etc. So find one of our leaders, Kirk in the back, or any of the folks who raised their hand earlier, and talk with us a little bit about how we can get you involved in our board and our movement.
My last question to you all. So development battles are ostensibly a local issue oftentimes. However, they're not really. They affect everyone in the Bay Area. If housing doesn't get built in one city, someone's going to have to live somewhere else, and it's going to impact everybody. You guys are doing fantastic work. Amelia showed a great map of all of these groups up and down the peninsula and the East Bay that are doing great work. How can you guys? How do these groups? How do your groups work together to bring these development issues to a greater regional light?
This is a challenge for us. Our folks are pretty focused on this very specific geographic area and this very specific project. But having said that, we have great alliances with a range of regionally oriented groups like Transform and Greenbelt, Committee for Green Foothills, and Working Partnerships USA. The League of Women Voters have been incredibly supportive on these things, but it's more them supporting us rather than our folks rising to affiliate with them. I think they're getting that hint, and maybe we can move it along. But I should also say that folks in our neighborhood, like San Joseans in general, we kind of have a chip on our shoulders about how much burden we're carrying of the housing responsibility for the region. So, yeah, eager to associate. They're in Monster. It's very valuable. They run our candidate forums for us, so that means we're not going to, well, that shields me from any accusation of bias. And they're all about participation and opening things up, so they can be a very, very great ally.
I think they covered it. I want to reserve any remaining time in case anyone else has questions in the audience.
Let's do it. Questions from the audience? Yeah, back.
Hi, Vince Rocha with the Santa Clara County Association of Realtors, and I heard an interesting statistic from the Bay Area Council recently. They said for every 1.5 jobs you need a unit of housing created, and so when you get that ratio out of whack, that's where you get displacement. And so in a lot of our Silicon Valley cities, you're creating 15 jobs to every unit of housing, right? And so the idea being that no business or resident is displaced necessarily because maybe they don't get to live in their unit of housing forever. It's when the overall pool of housing is they can't be relocated somewhere else. And I bring up relocated because sometimes you redevelop a housing. I think Alex brought up a really good point about like this housing development got redeveloped and it did displace a lot of people. But they became truly displaced when they realized there was no other housing they could possibly move into. And that's because we're getting, our ratios totally out of whack. And so just thinking about that like linking jobs and housing together in more of like the same way is one way to talk about maybe some of those displacement issues you guys brought up. And just, I don't know, that conversation is we want jobs or we want housing or we want this. It's like, no, they have to be harmonious. And I don't know, maybe you guys can talk about that.
So in defense of boomers, when Mark screwed us on the Alum Rock Station side, 6 of our watchdogs, including me, are retirees. We had time, a lot of time, and that's part of why the group was effective. Because people really could invest in time without the stress of family and work. But the city's been an ally. City of San Jose's been an ally for us by insisting on commercial space, mixed-use development, so jobs as well as housing. The big project that we actually said no to was almost 500 units of housing, and our community said no to it because the design wasn't remotely consistent with what was in the vision in the plan. It could have been adapted pretty readily, we thought, but the developer didn't think that. But the city also said no because it didn't have sufficient commercial space. So they're trying to hang tough on the job requirement, but it's hard for cities to do that, as you know.
Next. Yeah, go ahead. You.
So some of you said we're in a housing crisis, right? And I think that is the case. And I think we're at a time where, there was a housing crisis 20 years ago here. I think it's been exacerbated. And I don't see any sign of it letting up. Apple has a big plot of land in San Jose. Apple's opening their spaceship campus. Google just announced this project in downtown San Jose. My question, sort of relative to the previous question, is there any need to hold large companies accountable to building housing. Some other countries have used that. I mean, if Apple's building, near the North San Jose, near the airport, eventually they'll bring more jobs, right? Jobs is great, but at the same time, you need to think regionally about these. Who's going to supply that housing? There's a lot of, there's open land to South San Jose. I mean, we still have that burden with all these jobs coming in. Google, a 8 million square foot complex, 20,000 jobs. Where are they going to live, right? So here presents itself a great opportunity. They have this urban village, this massive opportunity to think big. Like if you are unimpeded, unengaged, how can we think big about solving this housing crisis actually? And all these efforts need to happen, but I think we're at a time where we need to prevent a housing catastrophe and sort of look at this housing crisis and prevent that catastrophe. Not to live with a crisis, but to think big, and I think that's what's necessary.
I don't think it would ever get this bad, but I worry about the old concept of being a company town, where a company builds housing and then they could have a lot more control over that. I don't think that's going to happen here, but I think what the real problem is again, I hate to be so pedantic, but the process. The fact that, and SPUR put out an outstanding magazine a month or two ago about 100 years of zoning, where basically we've created processes in our planning, in our systems, where it's easy to kill projects and hard to build new ones. And part of the reason is the political will that we're all working towards. Part of the reason is the government processes are so gosh darn complex, and they're difficult for citizens to figure out, and zoning just gets layered on top of layer on top of layer, and it looks like, what's that game, Jenga? Just like pull out a piece and it all comes crumbling. So I feel like if we can create the process, Christian, where groups can influence electeds to build housing, we can not worry so much about which company is located where and what land is free, and we can just get the housing built by getting more people to say yes to the right kinds of projects. Because right now, people are involved in the process, but it's not enough people, and in my opinion, they're saying the wrong things. And if we can get people saying the right things, knowing that elected officials listen to their people, we'll be on the right track.
I don't think the Google project should be allowed if there isn't going to be housing associated, whether it's run by Google or is adjacent to that property or whatever. It's just not acceptable. And as for being a company town, if Google builds at that scale, we will be a company town, whether they have housing or not. It's going to be a massive influence. I mean, I think it's great. It's a wonderful place for that kind of employment because of the transit connection. So that's terrific, but there needs to be associated housing one way or the other.
Teresa?
I absolutely agree that there needs to be associated housing, but not on the Google campus. I think that is a place for jobs, but it's our opportunity to really press the city to ease up on all the urban village planning. We need a ton more housing in the city. Doesn't have to be right there. That's not the right location, but it's the perfect lever to get the city to move, to open up opportunities around housing development.
Yeah, and actually the last version of the general plan undercounts the housing in our villages. Our folks would accept a higher level of housing than the cities included, but they're worried about that jobs balance, as you know what. but if Google comes in with 20,000 jobs, that kind of takes care of the balance.
Yeah.
Let's take one last question. Yeah, go ahead.
It wasn't really so much a question as it was a couple of statements. First, thank you for arranging all of these, and I'm really happy that it's at 6 o'clock. I'd love to see more, just because I work.
Thank you for coming.
It seems to me that, because I work a lot with neighbors and community activists, and I hear no constantly. And I think it's because we, in San Jose, the neighborhood where I live, we don't see any elegant projects that don't have horrible impacts. So I live very close to First and Taylor. It's an F intersection, F like Frank or fish or fire truck. And so what that means is people just see all of this impact of traffic. And so automatically, when we were showing the slide, it's like, yes, they're going to say no because that means my quality of life is going to go downhill, blah, 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 blah. The city needs to have some kind of very elegantly done project that they can point to and say, see, look, we did this, quality of life has improved, people are happy, there's art, there's places and spaces. that would be very helpful. I also think that when we're having these conversations between developers, cities, neighbors, we have to find each other's happy buttons. Because developers, they want the money. Neighborhoods, they want quality of life. You know, so what do people want? And then maybe come at conversations from that point of view. Maybe you guys have done that, I don't know. But that's kind of what was coming up for me, and I really appreciate all of your comments. Thank you so much.
Well, I think the folks who I find, at least in my neighborhood association, tend to resist housing, tend to be single-family homeowners between 40, 60, oftentimes Caucasian. And I think one of the winning arguments I'm seeing in talking to some folks in that group is, hey, I'm so glad you have a house. Your kids, you may have a couple, and you know that they probably won't be able to live here unless you give them your house. Your kids are moving away. You literally were losing generations for really strange reasons. And so I think that's part of how I would say it. I think Mila has a really good message around we're all in this together. And I think what we need to do as a movement is talk about everyone deserves to live in this wonderful place that we call home. Why are we denying that to people? And make folks realize that the decisions you make to say no means that someone else can't work. I've heard that every tech sector job creates 4 service sector workers. Well, we need our service sector if we're going to have tech sector. If we don't have tech, we'll become a Rust Belt city where we'll lose all our bread and butter economy. And if we don't have folks to serve tech or serve our larger community, then we'll become like a third world country where they're driving in from 120 miles away just to serve people and being paid unreasonable, unfair wages. So we need to work with both people to say equity is important, and so too is the way we design communities to make them more vibrant and enticing for the next generation. And to Christian's earlier point, I think that's part of how we're winning the war is that people our generation want to live in these kind of communities. They're healthier, they can be safer, they're more vibrant. It's just a great way to live a lifestyle. And I think of sort of the way I grew up, with all respect to my community and my parents. When I would drive home into my parents' suburban house, that's the end of my day. I'm in the suburbs, maybe I walk down the block, maybe I see a neighbor, but that's it. There's no more excitement at 6 o'clock when you get home. So I think there's a demand for this kind of lifestyle, and it doesn't mean that single families go away. We're going to have plenty of that in San Jose, at least for many, many years. It's a question of offering an alternative. And maybe that's how you phrase it as well to folks, is we have one type, we need the other type too, so that everyone has a choice of what kind of lifestyle they want.
Very, very well said. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We're going to end there. Mila, Terry, Alex, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you guys for coming out.